Welcome to Smith Weekly Discussions, an occasional program for our readers and listeners of Smith Weekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine the show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at Smith Weekly, including Paul M., Kent P., and Jackie A. John Truman Wolfe has joined the show today. John is an author, business entrepreneur, radio host, and newsletter editor covering various areas in finance, political policies, and more. You can learn more about John's work by visiting his website, strategicfinancialintelligence.com. John, it's a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, John, a lot of topics to talk about here, but let's get off the ground a bit by hearing some of your background and hearing a little bit about you first.
All right. Well, academically, I attended San Jose State University here in California. I majored in history there. I graduated there. I did a year of graduate work, so I got a master's degree there. And then I taught there at San Jose State on Western American history, and was intending to have an academic career. My father had a home furnishings business in the Bay Area, which he'd had for decades. And long story short, I had a newborn, and my dad came down and asked me to come up, and he was going to retire and wanted me to take things over. And I made a financial decision and went to work for him for a few years, but he wasn't about to retire. And so I was going to leave that business and teach, and I was doing some night teaching, and but there weren't any education jobs in California at the time, and I had gotten a lot of finance training working for my dad and his company, and long story short, I was an attractive candidate to a bank, so I went to work for a bank in the Bay Area, did very well there, became the senior credit officer, later moved to Los Angeles and was the regional senior credit officer for a bank in Beverly Hills for some time, and then ran into an old friend of mine, and we started a business management company. Business management is kind of a niche industry in Los Angeles and New York. We handle the business and financial affairs of entertainers, almost all working actors, actresses, producers, directors, singer-songwriters have business managers. We, collect the income, pay the bills, handle the taxes, the investments, et cetera, et cetera. So I was the CEO of that company, Wiseman and Burke, for 20 years or so. And then I retired from there a decade or so ago. And the company still carries my name, but and then I began writing. I write both fiction and nonfiction. The fiction is a detective series, which I have a lot more fun writing than the nonfiction, which is generally on the global financial scene, the global banking scene. One book I published a couple of years ago called The Coming Financial Crisis became a #1 Amazon bestseller. Another book that's had a fair amount of traction because people are a little bit concerned about banking is a book called The 99 Strongest Banks in America. I subsequently started publishing a newsletter, which you mentioned. That's at strategicfinancialintelligence.com, and I write a monthly newsletter covering, the primary focus is on precious metals and cryptocurrencies, but not exclusively. And then I do a weekly radio show. And so the subscribers to the newsletter get the newsletter once a month, and then a weekly transcription of my radio shows, in which case I interview folks and so forth. So that's what I'm doing. I'm writing and broadcasting and publishing a newsletter.
Well, lots of experience there and broad range of different things, and many of them sparked my interest as well. Let's get on to a couple of those subjects for a moment. Maybe you can talk about this because I suspect you covered it pretty well in your book, but what's your view just broadly about the financial markets here in the U.S., and what do you think can be expected over the next few years, John?
Well, it's a It's a good question. And, I don't have a crystal ball. That said, I can tell you what, my research tells me. I focus primarily on precious metals and cryptocurrencies. The reason for that is gold and silver have started bull markets and are just kind of at the beginning of those. I think that there's another 2 or 3 years at least that the precious metals will continue to escalate. Part of the reason for that, there's a number of technical reasons I could get into, but most folks know, or at least have some awareness, that the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank has poured, and I can't even keep track of the number anymore, but somewhere between 3 and 4 trillion, that's with a T, trillion dollars into the U.S. economy. That argues strongly for inflation, because inflation is basically defined as the amount of money in circulation relative to the goods and services. So if you and I are in a room with 30 people, everybody's got $10 in their pocket, and I'm at the front of the room and I've got an orange and everybody wants the orange, the money will bid for the orange, and the orange will likely sell for $10. If everybody in that room has got $100 in their pocket, the price of the orange is likely to be $100. So here we sit with an extra 3-4 trillion in the economy, and the production is not strong. So that argues for inflation, which in turn is one of the reasons I'm a strong supporter of precious metals. The cryptocurrency markets have basically become alive in the last, I don't know, 6 months. And I confess, you go back a couple of years, I was all poo-poo on Bitcoin, but no more. Cryptocurrencies are here to stay. They're not going away. And so we have 2 basic channels of digital currencies. One is the decentralized cryptocurrency market. That's Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple. If your listeners are familiar with those names, there's just a few of the top ones. But those are decentralized, meaning there's no central authority running those. The government couldn't sue Bitcoin. There's no board of directors. It's just people trading. The other form of digital currencies are centralized. And at this time, about 80% of the central banks on the planet are testing, in some case implementing, digital currencies, CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. This is the primary financial move on the planet as we speak, of banks seeking to replace cash in your bank account with zeros and ones. This is coming. This is no conspiracy theory stuff. This is definitely coming. China, the largest industrial nation on the planet, which is working with digital currencies, now has 4 cities that are operating on digital currencies. This is kind of a test for them. People are being paid in digital currencies. Various central banks around the world are in the process of implementing this. There was a speech a few months ago by the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. For your listeners may or may not know, there are 12 different Federal Reserve Banks in the United States. The big one is in New York, of course. But the president of the Cleveland Fed made a speech here a little bit ago, earlier in the year, calling for or talking about Americans setting up their bank accounts with the central bank, bypassing the banking system entirely and setting up their account with the central bank, who would then put zeros and ones into your bank account. The problem with that is the Fourth Amendment becomes a doormat, because the central bank and via them the government can follow every single transaction that gets made. You go in to see your doctor because you've got some ailment, The doctor gives you a prescription, you pay the doctor with a digital currency. The doctor turns around and sends a digital currency to a pharmaceutical company to buy some drugs. The pharmaceutical company sends the money to their lobbyist in Washington. The lobbyist sends the money to an escort to escort a congressman to a dinner. The escort sends the money to her plastic surgeon to get some new body parts. The plastic surgeon sends the money to his cocaine dealer because he's got a habit. Now, I'm being a little funny and a little bit dramatic there, but not so much. The point is that the government can follow every single transaction as it goes through that scenario that I just made up. So your privacy will be gone, and it's a major concern of mine. I've been writing a great deal about it. So, but this is coming. In terms of looking at finances on the planet, the coming digital currencies are a major one. In terms of the health of the country, the Dow has, busted 30,000. I'll be dead frank with you. I don't understand it. There's still millions of people out of work. Businesses are closed here. I live in California, and I can't tell you the number of friends of mine that are small business owners that they're just shut. And while the severity of that varies around the country, it's still a major factor. So I don't like to be pessimistic, but I don't look forward to the economics of 2021, regardless of who is the president. In Europe, the situation isn't any better. China is not doing well economically. So in general, the finances of the planet are not strong, and this pandemic, which is a whole nother subject, is making things worse.
Let's stay off COVID because we've got some other, I would say, more interesting stuff to talk about. But some good points. I know that the IMF is working on doing some testing also on the crypto blockchain front. There's certainly central banks and a lot of other folks out there, both centralized and decentralized efforts to bring out their own cryptocurrency or, blockchain-based currency. And I want to leave gold separate for a moment because you touched on cryptocurrencies. To some degree, they seem to be something that can be engineered. There's a lot of them. There's no stoppage of a person starting something tomorrow as far as a cryptocurrency. What do you think? I mean, they're competing for hearts and minds. Do you see that these vehicles are really, really finite in light of government control outside of that, and also that a group of people in the future wouldn't get together and say, let's dilute it or let's split the structure? What's your thoughts on just the fact that they could be another dilutive instrument?
Well, a very good question. Within the cryptocurrency world, you have basically two kinds of cryptos. I mean, there's all kinds of them, as your listeners may know. I mean, Bitcoin hit the world in 2009, and it was the only crypto on the planet for a couple of years. And then the progeny started, and we stand today with something in the order of 7,000 decentralized cryptocurrencies. Now, that said, some of those currencies, and the granddaddy of the currencies, Bitcoin, have no product or service. It's just speculation. That currency was originally developed to become an international currency by which people could buy and sell things, but it has become over the years basically an investment vehicle. There are vendors around the planet that take Bitcoin, more and more of that, but that original purpose really isn't what drives the price of Bitcoin. But there's nothing really behind it other than agreement of investors. On the other hand, there are cryptos that represent some world-class goods and services. Ethereum is a perfect example. You're talking about blockchain. An Ethereum, the coin there is called Ether, kind of represents that software effort that puts blockchain there. Ripple a company that provides a service to international banks for instant global transactions. So there are cryptos that represent some world-class stuff. The Ripple program, as I said, I'm a former banker. That's very cool. So some represent goods and services, some do not. Can the cryptocurrency market be taken down? I suppose if there was a concerted effort and enough money, you could manipulate those things, no question. So I don't think they're immune from that any more than, frankly, any international currency is immune from that. There is the infamous story of George Soros shorting the British pound and basically breaking the Bank of England. So currencies, fiat currencies or cryptocurrencies are manipulatable and are manipulated. How much of that's going on in the cryptocurrency market, I don't know. The stats that I follow and the graphs that I monitor leads me to believe that there are people behind the prices of these things that are manipulating those prices. That's another subject, but I think it's my effort to answer your question.
Yes, it's fantastic, and you bring up more points. Look, we know that even things like gold, to some degree, are not necessarily can escape the reach of the government, and so. But it wouldn't hurt from a stroke of a pen for the IRS to say, look, cryptocurrencies, if you have cap gains, we're going to tax it at a 90% rate. I mean, there's nothing to stop that from happening. And of course, if you don't do that, then we'll just enforce. And as you know, the Treasury Department and everybody else, all the other agencies can get on that bandwagon and track people down and make them pay fees or, taxes, and also revoke a passport, whatever it might take to get you to conform. And so I think that's a part of this as well. Now, there's obviously some strategies there, but, I think also you mentioned the Dow, the market going up in light of what's going on economically. With the amount of stimulus, and you mentioned the stimulus numbers, which I think are direct numbers, but the indirect stimulus via Federal Reserve and the bond buying and the ETF buying, et cetera, all the other programs, the lending to the states, all of that, I think it's even much higher than that number cumulative. What about the thought process of you've got cryptocurrencies out there, you've got hard assets like commodities, gold, silver, base metals, et cetera, real estate, and you get into these real assets and you look at cryptocurrency, and then you look at what the government does with diluting the dollar this year. Look, if the government's not going to respect an interest rate in my bank account, the government's not going to respect the dollar by printing trillions of dollars. Why don't I use my savings, which doesn't earn anything, and why don't I buy real assets? Do you think that might have something to do with the stock market going up, one? And then also the second question, what about the thought process of people asking themselves when they hold Bitcoin in their hand or on their thumb drive, whatever it might be, and say, what is money? Do you think that's being asked now?
I think it's being asked more than it has been. Let me go back to your first question. I think the primary reason that the Dow is going up is the 0% interest rates. I think that's driving the stock market. You can go and buy a utility company stock and get a 2, 3, 4% dividend. Just the simple economics of that, will drive the market. In addition to that, as you just noted, the Fed has been participating now in the equities market. So I don't know. I think that's the two primary factors that are driving it. I think it's a bunch of hot air, frankly. The economy doesn't justify a 30,000 Dow, in my opinion. But, when you've got the 0% interest rates, a lot of things happen. I expected the real estate market to suffer during this pandemic. It hasn't. It's boomed. Boomed may be too strong a verb, but it's up. The real estate market generally across the country is up. Certainly in California, it's up, and that's because I've got a dear friend that's a mortgage broker. I was talking to him last week, and he's doing 30-year fixed mortgages for like 2.25%. all day long. That's hardly a mortgage. I mean, and I'm having, I confess to you, I'm having my house refinanced for that. When the Fed's doing that kind of manipulation with the interest rates, it creates effects all over the place. And you mentioned, just to back up a minute, the IMF talking about digital currencies. Look, the governments control your behavior with these things, and this is coming. Some years ago, a couple of years ago, Christine Lagarde, who was the head of the IMF, this French communist woman who was the head of the IMF, and somebody asked her at a conference, and this is when cryptos weren't quite, or digital currencies weren't quite so in favor or spoken about, and some reporter asked her, what about digital currencies, and expected her to blow them off. And she did just the opposite. She said, I think, this is really, something we need to look at, and so forth. So, she gave a very positive response. So you've got the BIS pushing this. The BIS stands for the Bank for International Settlements. The Bank for International Settlements is the godfather of the global financial mafia. This is a bank in Basel, Switzerland, which most people have never heard of, which sits atop the banking world. Swiss law does not affect it. Its employees are immune from prosecution. They have their own law enforcement on the property. They're above the law. And the 55 key central banks of the world are members there. They fly into Basel, Switzerland periodically, get their marching orders, and they go home. Clearly, there is an effort here globally to turn the planet's financial structure into digits, which just to repeat, this empowers government not only to follow what you do, but to monitor and dictate behavior. Guy goes into the liquor store to buy a 6-pack of beer, gives the clerk his card and gets back a note and goes, nah, this is the third 6-pack this month. Sorry, you can't buy it. Oh, you wanted to buy a pack of cigarettes? Forbidden by law. I'm not suggesting that people buy beer and cigarettes. I'm just trying to make a point that the amount of control government will have over what you buy. Oh no, you can't, too many carbohydrates in that, you're obese, sorry. And this is not just something in the US, this is a global phenomena. And the IMF is looking to have an international digital currency, replace the SDR or make the SDR, SDR for your listeners stands for special drawing rights. It's the currency of the IMF. Turn that into digits. So there's a major movement here to get rid of cash, to replace the money in bank accounts with zeros and ones, to provide more control for governments. You're talking about what the IRS could do. They can, you got zeros and ones in your bank account, zip, they're gone. So these are challenging times, very challenging times. Anyway, I don't know if I wandered a little there. I'm not sure I answered your question, but that's my view of what's going on.
Yeah, certainly some evil times at that, John. But so stay on the subject here because I want to move on to nuclear power and uranium and other things here in a moment. But let's first finish up here on the topic. You can't leave out gold. So what's your thoughts on where gold has a role to play here, physical gold and also gold equities?
Well, we both know gold's been currency for 5, 6, 7, 8,000 years. Silver the same. And when the stuff hits the fan, gold and silver, people, go to their gold and silver. I think it will continue to have a place, I think, stronger and stronger as we go forward, and the economies that, as we've talked about, continue to weaken to some degree, that the price of precious metals will continue to go up. It was very clear to me last year. You could look at, I'm kind of a technical guy, so I operate on graphs, and you could see the top, that gold was being held at 1,400. It's just being held there. I said, it's going to break and run. And so it did. And, it's, I don't know, trading at 18 and change now. Silver the same. You could see the base on silver at $19. It broke that and is trading $24.50. So I'm a strong believer in precious metals. I think people should have some percentage of their assets in precious metals. I'm also a buyer and promoter of junior gold mining stocks. This is a little more risky. These things are a little more volatile. I think the base thing to have is, have some bullion in your home. And I'm not, there are a lot of services that provide the facility of, hold gold and silver, the Perth Mint down in Australia, or there are, places in Singapore and stuff. The best place is a safe in your home, in my opinion. There are junior gold mining stocks, which I like, and I've got a friend of mine who's a real expert in that area, and I have the good fortune of being able to, I do my analysis and then kind of bounce them off of him. So personally, I do both. I do bullion and I do junior gold mining stocks.
I'm a fan of both, not just gold, but also some silver for some pop and some leverage. Even some base metals and some of your other precious metals as well, I think have a part to play. On the physical side, I certainly, depends on where you live in the world, but I do believe in a diversification strategy for the physical, both at home and abroad. I'm a big fan of some split diversification on that front, just because of history would tell you that probably is a prudent move, especially in the US with what happened during the 30s. Just off of gold, off of silver for a moment, with potential inflation coming, which I think that's where we're ultimately headed, although it may seem like deflation right now. What's your thoughts on base metals? Do you see in general that base metals also have some room to run because of their real asset, hard asset properties, but also just their industrial use?
Absolutely. I follow them as I can, and I am a fan of them for the very reasons that you just said. My newsletter, which I just published yesterday, explores three blue gas companies, hydrogen fuel cell companies. The base metals, in general, I like for the very reasons that you said. I think there's something that I would stick my toe in the water on.
Yeah, I think if you look at things like, fertilizer companies, potash companies, et cetera, I think that these have been bombed out, have been starved for capital, have really enjoyed a low price environment, which has been a bear market, which, as you know, tends to disrupt supply chains. So I think places like that, and certainly, copper, even oil and gas in some cases can still look attractive where they are today after what's happened. There's some interesting propositions on that front. But before we move on here, on the gold equity, silver equity front, is there maybe a name you want to share with the audience that you like? Maybe something that's not a paid promotion?
Well, nobody pays me for promotion.
Excellent.
That's a good thought. Maybe I should talk to some of these folks. No, I don't. Nobody pays me for promotion. I like. There's a company called which has the appropriate name, Gold Mining Incorporated, and it's trading for I looked at it today and I forgot it. I think $2.27, something like that. Very, very smart guy running that company. I interviewed him on my radio show. Sharp guy. They've got I think 11 million ounces of gold in the ground, and then they just created. I say just like a few months ago, created a subsidiary which is a gold royalty mining firm. So that's part of the company. That one just looks good to me. I've done well with it. I think it's got a lot of room to run. So I like that company. I like, who else is good? Calibre Mining is, I'm a fan of. Anyway, there's a couple.
Familiar with both. We've had Amir Adnani on our show representing UEC, which is a uranium-focused company. Calibre Mining is a portfolio holding of SmithWeekly Research, and I'm certainly aware of Gold Mining Inc., although it's not a portfolio company, certainly aware of it. Well, let's move on. I want to get your view on energy, and specifically, I'd like to know if you're a fan of nuclear power.
Well, I am, and I'm about. You're a little bit ahead of me. I've just done a fair amount of research and wrote a newsletter on the lithium ion batteries, on Musk, on the electric vehicle market, which is, I'm sure you know, is basically booming around the world, not only here, but in Europe, China, and India, and the lithium ion batteries, and then started researching hydrogen fuel cells. And I'm sure, I know there's an ongoing debate environmentally and otherwise, but I think hydrogen fuel cells are, in terms of the energy for the electrical vehicle market, they're going to win that race. And I don't know that Elon Musk is ever going to suffer anything. He's a very bright guy. But I think hydrogen fuel is coming to the planet, has been coming to the planet, and is about to kind of break through. In terms of nuclear energy, it's interesting that you asked, because I just started a little bit of research on that subject so that I could, issue a newsletter on it. But I'm a long, long way from an expert on that subject.
With what we have on the energy front, just talking about high level energy. But when it comes to things like coal, natural gas, geothermal, hydroelectric, wind, and solar, when you look at certainly the big push over the last, call it 2 decades for solar and wind, really the last 15 years, maybe 10 years even, we all know that solar and wind is intermittent. It's certainly not base load. The uptime is pretty terrible. The component replacement, the panels, the batteries, that component typically it still has a life that might be 10 years if you're lucky. What's your thoughts on nuclear power being a baseload source of power, way more dense and a whole nother planet as far as density of power, being a cornerstone clean energy source that has the smallest waste footprint of any other source?
Well, I like it. From what I know about nuclear energy, I like it. You bring to mind a presentation I made to the senior loan committee of the bank when I was back as a banker on this subject, and we were making a loan to somebody. I don't even remember who it was. In my opinion, this is more a PR battle, because if you look at wind and solar, they get all the press from the environmental community. And let me hasten to add, my wife is the international president of the Earth Organization. So environmentalism, sane environmentalism lives in this house. Good pro-survival solutions to the environment. But wind and solar, in my opinion, have been hyped. They sound sexy. I can drive out to Palm Springs and look at the wind farms, but I think nuclear energy is much, much, much better source of ongoing energy for the planet. And I think I'm not sure what your view is on hydrogen, but I think there's great opportunity there. Duke Power just put $250 million into a hydrogen cell facility. And I don't know if they're the biggest energy company in the US, but they're one of the biggest. But from what I know of nuclear energy, I really like it.
Duke is a nuclear power plant operator in the U.S., as you know, among other sources. And, Exelion is the largest U.S. Nuclear utility. Makes a lot of sense. I certainly support future sources of energy. I do believe that the best thing we have in front of us is nuclear. But if we can harness things like fusion, that makes sense. But the waste footprint for the sources of power we have today, nuclear is no doubt a standalone. We know where it is. It's secured. It's protected. It's small footprint. It doesn't harm anybody. Whereas batteries being recycled, that's not even tracked. The environmental impacts from the land footprint, from wind and solar, the wildlife impacts, and solar covering a desert, to me, doesn't make any sense. Nor does it make sense putting wind turbines on the oceans. I agree that the PR is the big battle. I think that it is turning, and that nuclear will certainly start to catch a tailwind as we move on here, and especially small nuclear. I think that there's a lot of potential applications that have seen small modular reactors for 50 plus years, nuclear submarines, battleships, carriers that are all nuclear powered. There's even some commercial vessels that are nuclear powered. I think that these small applications should find its way into a commercial infrastructure, onshore. So we'll see how that goes. Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit more just on this other subject, because this is related to nuclear. John, you've probably heard and seen news about the uranium mining sector, which obviously is the feedstock fuel for nuclear power. Do you have a view on uranium equities, uranium mining equities specifically?
You're poking into things that I've just begun to have serious interest in writing about. I have a uranium company that I have been investigating that looks really, really good. I'm not going to mention the name at this point because I'm not done with my research. But I think that it looks to me, and the little I know, obviously you can correct me, but from my initial research, it appears that that market has been in a bear market for the last, decade or so, and is beginning to turn. And I think there's some great opportunity in, some uranium stocks. The ones that my friend has referred to me, I'm just beginning to research. I like this area. I like it a lot.
Well, I can tell you we know them all. We're one of the groups that has studied it among probably, I can think of maybe 5 groups that I'm aware of that have studied it very deeply. Certainly know all the companies globally, and we've spent a lot of time since really 2016 investigating the sector, and we became bullish in 2017. I'm happy to admit that we have been early. We haven't been wrong, but we've certainly been early. Here we are today, and things are looking amazingly fantastic, and nothing's happened really for all these years, which has also compounded the problem, which you'll find as you continue to study into not the demand side, but the supply chain breakage that's occurred. Focus on the supply chain. You don't even need to worry about the demand side, because once you realize what's happening on the supply chain and you look at a high level demand number, you're already sold on what needs to happen. So let's move on. You've spent some time internationally, John. What are your thoughts on being internationally diverse at this point? And do you think it's a smart move, really, given what we've witnessed in 2020?
Definitely. I mean, I'm a real patriot here. I taught American history. I love this country. I love my state that's being destroyed. But we're witnessing the decline and fall of the American Republic. I hate to say it, but the statistics just speak too loudly. That said, doing the research on where to go and what to buy and what to buy where, I had an interesting experience some years ago when I first published the book, The Coming Financial Crisis. It was originally published under another name, and then I added some chapters, got a new publisher, and changed the name. But it was called Crisis by Design, which was on the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, involvement in the global financial crisis of 2008. Anyway, a friend of mine in Taiwan got the book to some people in Beijing. She sends me an email and she says, the people at the CCP Chinese, in Beijing would like to talk to you about the solutions in the book. I thought it was a joke. I said, well, have them fly me over business class and put me up in this hotel. I knew a few nice hotels in Beijing, and she sends me an email back. She goes, they'll fly you any way you want. They'll put you up wherever you like. So the Chinese government flew me to Beijing for a week of meetings, and interesting set of meetings, including with a woman named Dr. Wang, who was one of the founders of the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, the central bank there. And also dinner with a guy whose name escapes me. I'm not sure I ever could pronounce it. But he's the president of China Gold, which is the Chinese government's 60% owned gold mining consortium. China is the largest producer of gold on the planet. And this guy was buying up gold mines around the world like Pac-Man. I mean, he was, South America, even in the US, and he was looking at backing the yuan or the RMB with gold. And I told him there wasn't enough gold on the planet to do it. And anyway, we had a little bit of argument's too strong a word, but discussion about it. But just kind of speaking internationally, that country is very gold focused. It remains gold focused. Now, that said, they're now rolling out, as I said earlier, this digital currency, the digital RMB. For your listeners, RMB stands for renminbi, which is one of the two names of the Chinese currency. One's called yuan, the other renminbi. It's the same thing. And there's talk about them backing this digital currency with gold. I mean, there's a tremendous PR assault on China in the United States, may be well deserved. I've gotten to the point that I so disbelieve anything coming out of Washington on a PR line that I have to do my own research before I make up my mind. But I have friends doing some very handsome investments in Singapore. And, some of these, speaking internationally, some of these digital mining companies, I've got an investment in one called, what's it called? I have to find the name before I sign off with you. The stock is booming. And these guys, they're crypto miners, right? And he's got facilities in Iceland, in Sweden, in Norway, because the computers heat up and they need a cold environment. And this is the only company that I know of or could find that you can buy stock in the company, and they're crypto miners.
It's not Hive,
And
is it?
yes, that's it. I couldn't remember the name. Hive, yeah. And this little, in the last couple of weeks, it's just like spiked up. I bought it way back, and but I like it. If you read the story on these guys, I like that company. I'm not sure where they're based. The interview I read, they were in Iceland.
I want to suspect their headquarters is in Canada, but their operations are primarily
No,
in
you're right.
Iceland.
You're right.
TSX
Yep.
or TSXV listed, I suspect. But you're right. The points about China, Zijin Mining is going around scooping up base metal projects. We've seen them in Central South America. We've seen them compete for assets in the Balkans. Nevsun, they won out. Zijin did on that to get that copper project. Serbia. We've also seen them go after a lot of gold projects. We've seen them partner with Ivanhoe Mines with their two substantial world-class assets in the DRC and South Africa. Back to the question, the international part of it, I really do think it's a fantastic time to have your foot in other places around the world. It makes sense from a financial standpoint, from a livability standpoint, from a human standpoint, not necessarily a citizen, a resident, to have other options to be able to live legally in other countries. I think that makes sense, and there's some nice options on that front. So, well, John, let's get ready to wrap up here. What are you telling your clients right now? What services are you providing to your clients? Maybe you can speak to your newsletter and the cost, and maybe just highlight that for the audience.
The newsletter, strategicfinancialintelligence.com. The primary focus is, as I said earlier, on precious metals and cryptos. I usually that comes out once a month. I usually make specific recommendations in that newsletter. In addition to that, as I said, I do a weekly radio show, and in some cases, interview various opinion leaders. You mentioned Amir Adani. I had interviewed him as well. Bright guy. But anyway, the point being that I take the audio file from the newsletter, send it to a transcription service, and they convert the audio into text. And then so my subscribers get a weekly text of the radio show in addition to the monthly newsletter. The newsletter is $99. It's $2 a week. I think it's a good deal. Occasionally I get into other subjects. I've enjoyed the interview because there are areas that you're obviously deeply involved in that I'm just beginning to look at. But things like nuclear and uranium and so forth are of strong interest to me. My last two newsletters, one was on lithium-ion batteries and what that meant to the electrical vehicle market. And then the recent one is on the competition from hydrogen fuel. And occasionally I wander off into politics and government surveillance, which I hate. I've got a newsletter that exposed, I did nothing but write on the crimes of George Soros and who he is. I've also written, this is maybe politically incorrect for your audience, I have no idea, but a newsletter on Bill Gates and what he and his foundation are doing relative to basically genocidal vaccination of young women in South Africa and India. It's just, it's terrible. Anyway, so occasionally I drift off into those subjects, but I always make investment recommendations, and yeah, there you go.
John, how can the audience reach out to you for more information about your work and any questions they might have?
You can email, you can go to the site, Strategic Financial Intelligence, and you can email me from there. And I'd be delighted to, answer questions and whatever. As I'm sure you know, I'm not a registered investment advisor, and so I can't make specific investment recommendations. I can talk about general areas, but I would just caution people, if they go, okay, good, would you manage my portfolio? I can't, I don't do that. But I'll tell you the best way to email me. I'll cut to the chase. Email me at Bruce, B-R-U-C-E, Bruce at brucewiseman.net. Bruce at brucewiseman.net. I'll quickly tell your audience the story. Bruce Wiseman is my name. I operate under the pen name of John Truman Wolfe because when I started writing, Bruce Wiseman didn't sound like a very authorly name. So I wanted a strong name as an author because I was writing spy novels. And John Truman Wolfe is my grandfather's name.
Well, John, look, fantastic conversation. Really appreciate you coming on and taking the time with the audience. Stay well out there and good luck.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.